A concerning story. The Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority, PPRA, is set to investigate allegations of racism in the property sector. This after complaints on acts of discrimination against black people were lodged. Some claim they were denied access to rental accommodation based on their race. For more on this, I'm joined by the PPRA's CEO, Mamodupi Mohlala, to expand a bit more on their investigation. So previously I'd heard of this, Mamodupi, people saying that a black person would call inquiring about a accommodation that's said to be available for rental, and they would be told that it's simply not available, and moments later when a white South African calls, they're told actually you can still come through and view it. But I thought it was anecdotal, but from what you are saying, this is actually more widespread than we realized.
Yes, thank you very much, Sulasiza, and good afternoon to you and your listeners. Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Last year, actually, we actually picked up on a story that eNCA was doing, and that was the story that actually triggered the investigation that we are currently undertaking. We saw a program whereby a gentleman in Cape Town, I think his name was Ossi, was trying to get access to premises, and he was denied access because the estate agent at the time indicated that the landlord or the owner of the property did not want to let out to tenants or to potential lessees who are black. We then followed up with the story. We did an investigation. We spoke to him. We spoke to the estate agents involved, and we found out that actually there was truth to the assertion that he was making. And as a consequence of that and that investigation that we undertook, we actually found that there were many cases of similar occurrences that were taking place. And we actually even found that it was so close to home that even some of the people who were sitting on the board at the time indicated that they had been victims of similar practices. We then felt that there was a need to go out and investigate. We published in the newspaper, invited stories from other would-be victims of this kind of behavior, and I think we opened a can of worms, because not only did we find that there's this practice in relation to members of the public, but we also found that there are a lot of acts of racism or systemic practices within our industry that are creating serious barriers to entry for black estate agents. We found that the practice is inside and outside of our industry.
In fact, that's the next stage that I wanted us to tackle, because suspected discrimination in as far as members of the public are concerned is one thing. The other aspect that I understand you're now looking at is practices within the industry itself in terms of estate agencies, the allocation of work, etc., etc. What exactly are you probing in regard to systemic practices within the sector?
Yes, no, we also found that there are lots of barriers to entry from the narrations or the accounts that we're getting from property practitioners or estate agents in the sector. We found that in terms of access to opportunities or access to stock in Gulf estates or in developmental, in Gulf estates or in property estates, you find that there are these requirements that have the effect of being prohibitive to black estate agents, and those have been brought to our attention, and we want to obviously engage not only with the complainants but also engage with the landowners or the property developers that have these particular conditions, and investigate fully whether these amount to barriers to entry. But over and above that, we also found that people who are trainees within the sector are also experiencing challenges, in the sense that they're arguing that the kind of training that they get compared to their white counterparts is not of an equivalent level, and that they feel that it actually prejudices them in relation to their retention within the sector going forward. So we're actually also looking into those kinds of practices. But if I can just also go back to the first issue that the first kind of discrimination that we picked up in relation to the general public. The story emanated from the Western Cape, specifically from Cape Town, and we picked up that there's a lot of issues like that in Cape Town. But we were also taken aback because because we also found that not only does this practice exist in Cape Town, we have got cases in Gauteng, we've got cases even in the Free State where there are these complaints by would-be black tenants or property buyers, whereby you find that they're excluded from a particular transaction because of the color of their skin.
Sure. So just tell me then, in terms of the modalities, how exactly will you investigate this? You've done the first part, I understand, in terms of making a call to, various people, various sectors of society to give you written submissions and share their experiences with you. The next stage is public hearings, but I also understand that you've also had your own, investigators do a bit of groundwork before you go into the public hearings.
No, that's correct. What we have done is obviously our investigators have spoken to the would-be victims or the individuals that are making these allegations, so that we can obviously assess the nature of the allegation and categorize it. But the next step will obviously be to give the entities and individuals who these allegations are being made against an opportunity to respond and know that these allegations are being have been leveled against them. Then we will obviously be undertaking the public hearings. They were supposed to have commenced this week, but we had to postpone because there are those individuals who indicated that they would want to be heard in camera and would not necessarily want to be heard in an open public platform. So we are rearranging our facilities so that we can cater for that. But over and above that, we are also going to be asking the would-be the individuals that allegations have been made against to also come and state their response in public. But over and above that, we're going to go to the industry stakeholders, because we do have industry configurations that represent property owners, that represent transformation in the sector. And we are going to ask them to make input and indicate whether or not they've been subject to this. But most importantly, what measures do they believe they can put in place in order to discourage this practice and completely stem it out going into the future? But we also want them to, their buy-in in relation to the document that we will be preparing as an outcome of this particular investigation, and we'll obviously be then forwarding it through our board to the minister and to Parliament. But we would want that the industry must also make commitments, especially those who are the owners of the bigger and more established estate agents. They must make commitments to making sure that this practice is stemmed out and is completely eradicated and does not ever show its ugly head in the future. So we will want that kind of buy-in, and as part of our public process, we will be asking them to come and make inputs, to make submissions, and also to make commitments on how we will then jointly as an industry deal with these matters going forward.
Lastly, Mamodupi, a bit of a convoluted question on my part, but I would like to know if your probe, your investigation will look at the ownership and control structures of the industry, whether that factors anywhere within, these practices creeping up, in that my understanding, well, the little understanding I have, is that many of the companies and firms that run estate agencies are sometimes, small operations, from generation to generation within the family, and conversations about compliance with the transformation imperatives of the country become a real conversation. The reason then I say it's convoluted is I'd like you, while you tackle that, to also tackle what might come out as a narrative that says, you guys are exaggerating the extent of racism here. I mean, it's a coincidence that a person who just so happens to be a white South African gets allocated these properties in affluent suburbs, and they end up getting that business. So if you can tackle those two aspects, the sizes of the firms, and ownership and control structures, but also the likelihood that there could be a counter-argument that says it's just coincidental, it's not systemic like you're seeking to suggest.
Yes, no, definitely. I mean, that is an inevitable aspect of the inquiry. So we will definitely be looking into that. And I believe that the new act, which is the Property Practitioners Act, has actually got a specific chapter that talks to transformation. And if we're talking transformation, we cannot talk transformation without talking to issues of the ownership structure, and also dealing with the nature and the idiosyncrasies of this particular industry, being the fact that you do get family businesses, which are small entities, but you you also get your big multi-billion rand entities as well that are also quite prevalent and have a lot of interest in influence in the industry. So we will be looking at transformation in relation to the different configurations that exist within the industry and how it needs to now take place, because we are now talking many years post-democracy, in fact, more than 3 decades post-democracy, and we're not seeing real change. So from a transformation point of view, this factor will definitely be taken on board, and it will form part of the holistic inquiry that will be undertaken. But over and above that, in terms of the Property Practitioners Act, we do intend on putting in place a specific scorecard, because there's a specific provision that says all entities that transact with government in the property space will have to be evaluated in terms of their transformation credentials, and we will have to be providing such information. So as part of this process, we will also be dealing with the issues of ownership and control, and the fact that a scorecard needs to be put in place and properly monitored in order to make sure that there's compliance with the Act, but over and above that, in order to ensure that there is holistic transformation within the sector.
All right, I've got to thank you for your time and your insights. We're looking forward to seeing how that process unfolds. That's Mamodupi Mohlala there joining us. She's from the Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority, PPRA, formerly known as the Estate Agency Affairs Board, and there she's the CEO.